Hey everybody, welcome back to Mixing Music Analog and mixingmusicanalog.com and here on our YouTube channel. And this time out, we're going to do another plug-in versus hardware sound comparison. We are going to take a listen to the new Slate Digital FG-DYN plugin, which is the SSL, the SSL 4000 Dynamics that would go in the E-Series console. And we're going to compare that to my SSL Dynamics 611 500 series module. That's what we're going to listen to today. We're going to compare the two. We're going to listen to on a kick drum, a snare drum, some acoustic guitar, and vocals. And then you guys can let me know in the comments below which one you think sounds better, or do they sound the same, or can you tell which one is which? Well, I'm going to tell you which one is which, but which one do you like better? So before we get to that, if you like what you see in this video, please consider subscribing, also the notification bell, and also go out to mixingmusicanalog.com and check out what I have going on over there. So now before we head on into Studio One and I show you the setup here, let me give you a quick little 30-second backstory. So oddly enough, about a week before I started recording today's video, I had purchased used on reverb.com 4 SSL 611 Dynamics 500 series modules. Maybe it'll come up on the screen here in a second. I have a camera on it over there in the rack. I have 4 of them side by side in the rack because the SSL Origin doesn't have any dynamics. And so I wanted to get a few of those E-Series modules to see how they compare, just to have some extra compression in the box so I can maybe not use channel strip plugins as much, and I just wanted to see what they sounded like. So I got 4 of them so I can start to put them systematically as an insert point on the board. 3 days after I got those modules, Slate Digital releases the new FG-DYN plugin, which is their model, their emulation of that same SSL 4000 Dynamics that would have been inside of the old classic SSL console. So I thought that was interesting. So I get the modules in hardware form, and less than a week later, he puts out the plugin. How ironic is that? So I thought this might be a good opportunity to let's listen to the difference between the plugin and the hardware. Is there really any difference? I know Slate puts out wonderful plugins. I use his plugins all the time and have been for years. He doesn't put out a bad plugin. So we're going to check that out. So before we jump into Studio One, let me tell you what we're going to do. Let me tell you how this is set up. So the way we have this is we're going to listen to it on a kick, snare, acoustic guitar, and vocals in isolation. So the way I have this in the DAW, if we jump on over here into Studio One, so I could show you what I have. The first thing I did is over here in Brown, I have these two. We have a kick in and a kick out mic, and I mixed those and blended those to a kick group channel here, a kick bus. And on that kick bus, we have the new Slate FG-DYN, okay? Dialed it in, and we'll talk about the settings in a second. Then I duplicated those tracks exactly, and I have over here in purple, the same kick in, the same kick out going to another group, and on this group, there is no plug-in, because on this group, they're going straight out to the board where we're gonna insert the hardware, the 611. So on channel 1 on the console, I'll look over here. On channel 1, we're going to have the track that has the plug-in. And on channel 2, we're going to have the track that has the hardware inserted. So now on both channels 1 and 2, the EQs are identical. The preamps and how hard we're hitting the console is identical. There's no other processing being done. We have bypassed the SSL bus compressor. I bypassed the fusion, so it's just coming into the channels and back out so you guys can hear the audio. I've level matched it as closely as humanly possible. And so that's how we have it for the kick. If we jump back into Studio One, you'll see the same thing here with the snare. Over here in green, we have 2 snare tracks. We have a snare 1 which says plugin, snare 1 plugin, snare 2 hardware. Once again, that's going to come out the tracks 3 and 4. 3 will have the plugin, 4 will have the hardware. Then we did the same thing with a vocal track. We have vocal 1 plug, vocal 2 hardware, and that's coming out on 5 and 6. And then we have an acoustic guitar here with a plugin, an acoustic guitar without a plugin, and that is coming in on channels 7 and 8. Now, the way the signal flows through the Origin is, or the way we're having it flow through the Origin is we first have, let's start with the kick track. we have the FG dynamics, okay? So it's hitting the compressor, then it is hitting the EQ on the board, okay? So when I inserted the hardware on the second kick track, I made sure that the hardware is before the EQ, not after the EQ. It's pre-EQ. So that means that on both the plug-in track and the hardware track, the signal path is the same. It comes from the compressor to the EQ out of the console. Make sense? So if we jump in here into Studio One, let's take a look at this kick track here. So let me just show you what I did. So our first track right here is our kick group. Let me just solo this up. And if I play this back for you, okay, you'll see that I have about 3 dB of compression just hitting the needle, kind of how I would normally use this on a kick drum track. I'm not going to do a lot of compression. I'm not going to hit it very hard. I just want to kind of tighten it up. We're using a slow attack. We're using a soft knee. You can see the threshold here, the release time and the ratio is about a 4:1 ratio. Both the linear release is in the out position, okay? So that is on the plug-in kick track. On the hardware kick track, let me close this for 1 second. And again, I'm sure I'll bring up an image on the screen here in a second or two if I haven't done so already. You are going to hear just the hardware. And you'll see on the hardware that we're compressing the same amount. It's going to be the first one. In the image on the screen, you should see 4 SSL modules. Number 1 is the kick drum, and they're numbered at the top right-hand corner. Yes, top right-hand corner of the module, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. We're looking at number 1 for this time, so we're doing the kick. So that is the hardware, same ratio, same attack, slow, same release, hitting about the same amount of compression, just so the 3 dB light kind of lights up. And now what I'm going to do is, all I'm going to do is play back this section of music, and I'm just going to toggle back and forth between the plug-in and the hardware, the plug-in and the hardware. So you have to keep your eye on the tracks here in Studio One. Okay, the plug-in is number 1, the hardware is number 2, okay? So to the far left is the plug-in, to the far right is the hardware, and I will bring the plug-in up on the screen so you can see it. Okay, the gate is not engaged at all. I tried setting this up at the gate. It made it a little more complicated. The gates react a little bit differently. I just want to hear the compression. So here we go. We're going to start with the plug-in, and then we're going to jump over to the hardware. We're going to go back and forth and see if you can hear the difference. And I'll tell you what I hear in the room. Here we go. Okay, so what do I hear here? So what I hear is, and again, you'll notice that on the plug-in, the threshold dial is in a different physical position than on the hardware. So even though the dials may not be in the most identical place except for the ratio, the release and the threshold are reversed, but we're getting the same amount of compression. They are a little bit different in the way they're positioned physically on the units. What I hear with the kick drum is that with the hardware, it seems like it's a little bit thicker to me, and it seems like it's just a tiny bit, little bit more depth, where the plug-in seems a little bit more flat. But it is so close. This is such a wonderful emulation of this particular piece of hardware. It's crazy. Now again, they're going to sound tiny different because we don't know what Slate used to model which particular console's dynamic section, and obviously it's not my same unit, so They're not identical in tone. The tone's a little off too, but the EQ is identical on the board. It's just the way that the circuitry in hardware sounds different from one unit to the other. But from a thickness and from a depth point of view, I hear a little bit more depth in the hardware. So I don't know how that conveys over YouTube, but let's listen to it again. So we're starting with the plugin. Here we go. It is so incredibly close. So incredibly close. I feel like the hardware has a little bit more attack on the kick, on the slap, on the upper frequencies in that maybe 6K mark, where you can hear the beater, the attack of the beater, maybe just a little bit more. Incredibly close. Incredibly close. That's what I love about Slate, man. He always makes amazing emulation plugins, and this one does not disappoint, at least on the kick drum. Let's listen to that kick one more time, and then we'll jump over to the snare. So we're going to start back with the plugin. Here we go. So close. So close. So that's the plugin versus the hardware on a kick drum. Now let's go over to snare and let's do the same kind of test. So now on the snare drum, if you're looking at the 500 rack, it's the second module, okay? The second, number 2. That's the snare drum. Same thing. This time I'm using fairly close to the same settings as far as attack and release and ratio, maybe a little bit more compression, but we're using a slower attack. We're going to get to a fast attack on acoustic guitar and vocals in a second, but this is similar in settings on a snare. Again, running to 2 separate channels. They're hitting a board exactly the same. The EQ is identical. I've level matched these in the room. So in the room, it is as close to level matched as I could humanly make this. And again, I know this is difficult sometimes to convey over YouTube, so you just got to trust me that this is as close as it gets to being level matched. So here we go. Here's the snare. We're going to start on the plugin, and then you're going to look at module number 2 on the 500 rack to see the hardware, which is going to be the second one here to the right in green. So we're looking at the green tracks. Here we go with a snare. Oops. Maybe I ought to, there we go. Okay, so what I hear this time on the snare is, again, the hardware and the plugin, they seem kind of the same, three-dimensional. As far as I don't hear one is deeper than the other, but I do hear in the hardware, it seems like there's a little bit more meat, little bit more low mids in the snare. It sounds a little thicker, maybe a little deeper, but again, super, super, super close. Let's continue. Let's go back to the plugin. I even hear the hi-hat in the hardware track to be a little bit more open, the hi-hat bleed, just to give me some point of reference to what I'm listening to. But once again, it is incredibly close, incredibly close. Let's try it one more time and then we'll move over to a vocal track, and I'm just going to take a peek at our hardware to make sure we're compressing the same amount, just to try to be as fair and as make this as even, as equal between the two tracks as we can, right? So I see we're getting a little bit more compression on the hardware. Let me see if I could dial that back a little bit. Let me see if I can get that a little closer. Okay, so we're getting about 3, and we're hitting about 6 dB of compression on the heaviest hits. Again, the hardware sounds a little bit deeper to me, a little bit deeper to me. Now also keep in mind that both the hardware and the plugin have an auto makeup gain kind of a thing on its own as well. So I left the output on the plugin at 0 because there is no way to turn a makeup gain up or down or an output up or down on the hardware. So again, trying to finesse this thing so it sounds the same volume-wise. Let's try one more time. We're starting with the plugin. So again, I got it matched as closely as I can. Again, it's as close as I can make it. Volume-wise in the room, it sounds the same. The hardware seems a little bit deeper. At times though, depending on the velocity of the snare hit, I seem like I'm getting just a touch bit more compression on the hardware. It's really difficult to dial them in to be 100% accurate the entire passage, but it's really close. But I will say again, this plugin, fantastic, fantastic. Sounds great compared to the hardware. It's not that big of a difference at all. It's really, really subtle in the room here. Let's try vocal. So same thing. We have our first track here, Vocal 1 plugin. That's going to be our plugin, obviously. And then you're going to be looking at 500 rack hardware module number 3. That's going to be the hardware. Again, this time we used the fast attack, a little bit more compression. The vocal's a little bit more aggressive. And so I tried to, again, set it to be exact. Hitting the board at the same rate. EQ is exactly the same. Signal path is exactly the same. Compressor, EQ, out the board. Okay? So here we go with this vocal track. Let's listen to this and let's just see what this does. We'll start with the plugin.
I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hey!
That to me is almost indistinguishable between the two. It is so incredibly close. The closest of the other two examples thus far. I felt the vocal was the closest. You could swap one out for the other and no one's really going to be able to tell you the difference. Let's try that again. Let's start with the plug-in. Oops. And then we'll jump back to the hardware. Keep your eye on the solo buttons here. Number 1 is the plug. Number 2 is the hardware. Here we go, starting with the plug-in. Oops. Come on now.
Reaching out for someone, I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm reaching out for someone, I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hey!
There's vocals. Really close. Really, really close. Okay, last thing here. We're going to do an acoustic guitar. Once again, I'm going to move the loop around here. Okay, so again, number 1 is the plug-in. Number 2 here is going to be the 4th module in the 500 rack. So now you have all 4 modules there. Once again, like with the plug-in, we tried to set the hardware exactly the same. And we're using a fast attack. It's kind of it's picked in the beginning and kind of heavy strumming as we move forward. And we'll see what we got here. So let's start with the plug-in and then we'll move over to the hardware. Keep your eye on both and you can see for yourself. So once again, extremely close. In a different couple sections of the passage, you'll see one is compressing just a tiny bit more than the other. But in the room here, you can't even really hear that difference. I don't hear any difference here again. To me, that, like with the vocal, you can almost swap those two out and it's so incredibly close. I don't really think it matters. And so let's listen to that one more time. We'll start with the plug-in and then we'll go to the hardware. So there you go. So that is the FG Dynamics by Slate Digital compared to the SSL 611 500 series Dynamics module in hardware form on 4 different sources. So what do I think overall sitting in the room? Because again, I can't always tell what it's going to go like over YouTube. I will tell you that on all four sources, it is incredibly close. It is almost impossible to tell the difference. The kick drum to me sounded again like it was a little bit deeper. That would be my my thought on that. The snare drum, the acoustic, and the vocal are even closer than it was on the kick drum. So Slate did a hell of a job with this plugin. Again, he makes fabulous plugins, and it's funny that this came out literally less than a week after I bought 4 of those things. So now I wonder to myself, do I really need those when I can just use the plugin? But here's the thing. Let me switch over to this camera. Here's the thing though. Just keep in mind, and not that this matters, well, it does matter, but it may not make a big difference to you. When you're using hardware, you have the ability on the origin anyway to flip pre or post, meaning I could put that compressor before the EQ or after the EQ. Now, typically I would EQ first into a compressor, typically, but the way this test is set up, I have it before the compressor because when you're running with plugins in the box, it's always going to be before the EQ, right? So when you're running with plugins, it goes compressor, EQ on the board. When you're running at hardware, you could go EQ on the board to the hardware, or you can do it hardware to the EQ on the board. You can flip it. So if you really want to have your EQ before dynamics always, if that was the case, then you'd want to use the hardware because you don't want to do it with a plugin. But honestly, and most times that's what I do. Most times I'll EQ into compression. But in a case like this, I could see myself, like I was doing on prior mixes using the Plugin Alliance and the Wave CLA Mix Hub. I was using the plugins across all the tracks just to touch the needle, as it were, just to kind of grab the peaks, not doing any real heavy compression, just a light amount of compression. Then I'm hitting EQ, and then if I need to do some additional compression, I'm using all the extra outboard gear on selected tracks where I feel like I need to compress more, whether it's on an individual track or on my group channels, okay? Then I can use hardware after the fact. So in this case, it would be okay to use this plugin, you know, and not need to have a bunch of 611 dynamics. You know, some people had said to me, well, your board doesn't have dynamics. What if you eventually, and I thought this too, eventually bought 32 611s and 3 500 series racks and put them after my compressor. And then I would have compression, hardware, and EQ all hardware and not use plugins at all. Could do that. It's a hell of an expense to do that, right? And in this particular case, from this test, the plugin is just as good. So maybe you don't need to have all that hardware, or maybe I keep the 4 that I have so I could sprinkle them around, but maybe I say for all of my general purpose, first level of compression, I can use something like this in the DAW. Now I haven't compared this hardware yet to the Plugin Alliance channel strip or the CLA Mix Hub. Maybe that'll come in a future video. I did this particular plugin because it just came out right before I wanted to record this video. So I thought it would be fitting to do it because it is the brand new plugin by Slate Digital, and Slate Digital is widely popular. So that is our test between the two. Let me know in the comments below which one you liked, which one you thought it was different. How did it sound on your system? Again, it sounds about as close as it could sound here. I'm not here to tell you that one is wildly better than another. It's not. Not in this case. Not in this case. And I will say that other hardware versus plugin tests that I've done, I've always seen a much bigger difference or heard a much bigger difference in the more three-dimensional thing. I didn't get that much of a thing happening in this particular test. So it's interesting. So not every plugin is substandard to every piece of hardware, and not every piece of hardware is better than a plugin, right? Regardless of cost in sound, right? So it's interesting. So let me know in the comments below what you thought. Let me know if you'd like to do more tests like these. And until the next video, I've been Dave with Mixing Music Analog and MixingMusicAnalog.com. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.